Hello, and welcome to the BYU Family History Library webinar series. We're glad you could join us today. I'm Megan Smith, and I'll be your host for this webinar. If you have technical difficulties during the webinar, please use the chat box, and I can address your concerns. You are welcome to use the chat box during the webinar for comments, insights, and questions. However, all questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation. Our next webinar is on May 14th with Catherine Grant. She will be giving a presentation entitled Demystifying AI in Family History. If you would like to access a previous webinar, please visit our webinar index on our website or search on our YouTube channel. All of our webinars are recorded and uploaded by the following Monday for your convenience. We also post links to recordings and other updates on our Facebook and Twitter accounts. For today's webinar, we are pleased to hear from Maureen Brady, who will be giving a presentation on Rules I Learned Along the Way, a case study. Before we begin, here's a little bit about Maureen. Maureen Brady, a former school librarian and computer educator, has 40 years' experience with family history research. She has traced her Scottish roots back to the end of the 17th century and beyond, and has also pursued Chicago and the Midwest, the Trans-Allegheny U.S., Quebec, Irish, and Swedish research. Maureen has made numerous presentations to genealogical societies, libraries, conferences, and workshops throughout the U.S., as well as presenting for the Brigham Young University Library Family History webinar series. She is a member of the Genealogical Speakers Guild, as well as a life member of the Aberdeen and Northeast Scotland Family History Society and the Ohio, Chicago, and McHenry County, Illinois Genealogical Societies. She is also active in the Kentucky, Middle Tennessee, and Lake County, Illinois Genealogical Societies, the British Interest Group of Wisconsin and Illinois, and the Chicago Scots Genealogical Group. If Maureen is ready, she can share her screen and we'll turn the time over to her.
Okay, hopefully we've gotten past all the technical problems for tonight and we're ready to go. So this is something I put together that is, I called it Rules Along the Way. I've been doing this now for over 41 years. And as I've done it, especially the first 10 or so, I made some, not necessarily mistakes, but I just didn't know what I needed to do to go to the next step or something like that. So I came up with this list of 17 rules, as I call them, that I share with the people I meet at the family search centers and other places as things to help you perhaps expand your research or direct your research in a different path, or just say to yourself, oh, I never thought of that. So that's where these ideas came along. And Megan, did you put the handout in the chat?
Yes, I just sent the link in there.
Okay, and we'll if you have questions, put them in the chat, and hopefully there'll be time at the end to address them. So quickly, I'm working on my own dad's side, the paternal side. And so just to give you an idea, this is my dad at age 4. And this is my dad at age 15 when he lied about his age to join the Navy during World War I. And so this is the family that I'm focusing on tonight with all of my examples. In your handout, in addition to the 17 rules, on the second page is where I started 41 years ago and what I knew or what I didn't know on that second page to help you maybe follow along. So rule number 1 is do write down everything you quote unquote know. Everything you know as a fact, everything you think you know, every story you've heard, anything at all that you have some knowledge, or at least you think you have some knowledge about any part of the family on the side that you are researching. So this is a repeat of what's in your handout, and then there was more in your handout, but this is what little I knew. My dad was married twice. I was the child of the second marriage. By the time I was born, my dad's father was deceased. My grandmother did not consider a non-Catholic marriage to be valid, so she barely ever talked to me or my mother. And actually, the only time I ever saw my dad's mother was at Christmas and Easter. So there wasn't a lot to go on, but I did write it down. And when I started, this was my complete pedigree chart. My dad and his parents, and as much as I knew about his parents, And then this was the complete list of descendants of my grandfather that I knew about. So not a lot to start from, but you put it down, you organize it, you get it into your family group sheet, you get it into your pedigree chart. So you have something concrete to look at and to reference when you're trying to solve research problems. Then rule number 2 is always then, once you've done that, now it's time to interview your living relatives. So I didn't have very many. I've had my mother, which remember was the second wife, and she gave me this information that I'm not going to take time to read through it, but some hints there. I had some aunts' names. I had an uncle name. There was a cousin, a couple of cousins she knew about, and so on. And then from my dad's only then surviving sibling, I found out about George's middle name, Margaret's middle name, and a few other details that my aunt remembered that might help me with my research. So then rule 3, once you've done all of that, you want to start looking at what might you already have in your home that could be in a drawer, in a trunk, in a file cabinet, in a box up on the shelf in the closet, in any place you just stash things around your home. And you might be very surprised at some of the things you've already gathered that you didn't remember you had or didn't realize they could be helpful. So in my case, I was lucky enough to have my grandmother's death certificate, my dad's mother's, and I also had a couple of things for my dad's funeral, one of which was the card that came with a floral remembrance from these 3 couples. And I found that in my material inside of the funeral guest book that I had kept. So you might find other things. You might find military papers. You might find marriage certificates. You might find actual birth announcements for various babies in the family. The list is rather exhaustive. So you want to go through any place you might have stashed things as they came in the mail, as you picked them up at a funeral or a wedding or whatever, and just stashed them somewhere. Then rule 4 is, this is very important, is don't check only one website. Today we have a vast library of websites which have information from many different places, many different types of information. And there is now no one site, never really has been, one site that is going to give you everything. So the issue here and the problem to solve is identify the sites that have the information for the family you are researching. You need to identify where, and then what websites would have information about that where. So in my case, just as an example of a comparison, Family Search, I have a Chicago Catholic family. So Family Search, even before the digitization and full text, had all of these topics and record groups available on microfilm for me to start doing my research. On the other hand, Ancestry had a little bit of obituaries, 2 newspapers, but from the suburbs. And then there was a particular database called Chicago Irish Families, which was a compilation from Chicago newspapers of birth, marriage, and death entries. So you can see the comparison. If I had stuck with just Family Search, I would have gotten a lot of primary records there, but I would not have gotten the newspapers or the obituaries. If I only did ancestry research, I'm only really focusing on the deaths in the family and not the rest of the events. So this should be an example of why you need to go look at more than one site. And I'm only looking at my Brady line as it is in the United States. I've not even started to talk about Ireland, which we won't do in this particular webinar. So rule 5 is do trust in blind luck. We have angels that watch over us. We have people on the other side of the veil who watch over us. And while some people would call it blind luck, we know that they are guiding us to particular things that we need to do, or something that just pops up, for instance, in our emails. So in my blind luck, one of them is I had my grandmother's death certificate, And there were her parents, Andrew McDonough and Ellen with an unknown surname, which I found rather interesting because it was Margaret's daughter who filled this in, but obviously my Aunt Jan did not know Ellen's surname. But at least I had that. And so then, and here's where the blind luck comes in. This is the 1900 census of Chicago, Illinois. And there's my grandfather, George, and his wife, Maggie. That's Margaret Ellen. And their first son, George. This is from a year before my father was born, but at the same address as where my father was born. So I knew it was the right family. Well, look at the blind luck. The family immediately below them and in the same building is Andrew McDonough and Ellen and their son William. And on my list of what I already knew about my dad, he was named after his uncle William, and there's the William. So there's a double lesson here. Trust when something may come up and you'll go, whoa, is that really something that pertains to my family in a place you don't expect it? And the other part of this lesson is when you're looking at a census, be sure you're looking at the entire page and the page before and the page after, even in an urban setting, because you may find friends of the family that you knew about, aunts and uncles, or other people that have popped up in the records and you've wondered how they fit in to your family. So you always want to look at other names on the census pages. Then continuing the blind luck and going to the cemetery to see my grandparents' stone, right next door is Andrew J. McDonough and Ellen McDonough's stone in the same style. They were probably ordered at about the same time. And now I have complete death date for Andrew and Ellen, at least off their stone. Still to be proven, but it gives me a good idea. So I go look for Andrew's death certificate first, and it had a date in 1913, and here it is down here. That's his burial date, but here's the other information. And then we get up here at the top that Andrew was born in Chicago in August of 1843. This surprised me. I did not know that I had Chicago roots that deep. And then if you look over here, we have John and McDonough and Mary Osborne as Andrew's parents, John from Ireland and Mary from New York State or New York City. We're not sure there. There's lots of other material here that you can pull out, but already we have added from my grandmother Margaret, her father, Andrew J., and now we have a good link and a good hint about who his parents are, as well as Andrew's birth and death dates. And we know that from the stone that he's buried in Mount Carmel Cemetery. So these last few pieces were not, gee, I need to go and look for a death certificate and I'm going to get this information off of it. It was, I had the stone, which was from that death certificate of my grandmother, and then I worked backwards and found this other information more or less by accident. I stumbled into it. Now, if you're a good researcher and you follow the good research rules, then you wouldn't stumble into it. But this was quite early in my research and I did stumble. So that's why I'm saying blind luck. Then from that death certificate with that birth date, there was only one Catholic church in Chicago in 1843. It was then microfilm, now digitized. There's a picture of it down at the bottom of the screen, but here's the baptismal entry for Andrew McDonough, baptized in October, born in August. His parents are John and Mary Ann, and his sponsors are Michael Quigley and Bridget McDonough. No relationships given for the sponsors, but you could suspect that Bridget was some relationship to John. So now I have taken it back and found the primary document to prove that, yes, Andrew McDonough was born in Chicago in August of 1843. So moving on to number 6, which I was thinking this is blind luck, but it really is serendipity. And they kind of go together, and you maybe can debate which is which or if they are one. But I was really struggling with the Brady side of the family. I knew George, and from his death certificate, I had the fact that his father was Henry M., but I never could find Henry M. And so, out of desperation, one day I did a Google search, and this is the search terms as I type them down here on the bottom of the screen. And when I did that, the first hit that came up at the top was an old query from 2002. And this is only part of the query. And she goes on about what she's looking for and so on. But at the very bottom of this page of this film, you see here, one of his children was Henry M. Brady, my great grandfather. Well, he was also my great grandfather. And it kind of agreed with what I knew about him. Not Dalton, but the Chicago reference certainly was. And so I'm wondering who she is. And I took a chance that the email address was still good, and it was, and found out that this query was from a lady named Joan Waller. Now we go back to what I had found earlier in the material found around my house. And here's that floral card signed by Jim and Joan Waller. So this is the same lady, and we connected, and she in fact is my second cousin, and we went on from there, and she provided quite a bit of information. Would I have known to go and look for Joan Waller? I should have, but I didn't. And then with the other names, are the relationships here of any sort? I just looked at the card and said, this is nice, I've got some names, and moved on. But that query got me back to Joan Waller and a whole lot of information. And then, if you are of a mind or you do it, you give programs on genealogical research at local libraries and genealogical societies, which I do. And at one of them, one of the guests at the meeting, one from the library, asked if, came up to me and asked if I was Maureen Brady, and I said, yes, I was. And he said, well, does this name, Larry Adair, mean anything to you? And I said, well, yes, he's one of my cousins. And then he said, well, I'm that Larry Adair. He saw my name associated with the program in the library news, took a chance it was the same Maureen Brady, came and introduced himself, and he and I have now been not only exchanging research, but he's the collector of the family photos. And I'll show you some examples, well, in just a second. It was totally by chance, totally by serendipity that he saw the ad, came to the meeting, and introduced himself. And because of that, I've been able to find some family photos that I did not have in my family. They were not passed down on my side through my dad. Men tend not to do that for whatever reason, but through Larry's grandmother, the female side. So this is Margaret Ellen McDonough, my grandmother, at her confirmation at around age 16. This is the same lady, maybe 5 or 6 years later. And this is their marriage certificate, marriage photo of George Henry Brady and Margaret Ellen McDonough in November of 1896. And then this was my prize photo that he found and gave to me. This is my dad's sibling, my dad and his siblings on that date. And this is my dad. He's age 11 about at this point. This is my Uncle George, and this is literally the only picture I have of my Uncle George. And then the 3 girls down here. And you'll notice that the youngest this is not in age order. And while these 2 are standing, Aunt Mary is in a chair because she had severe cerebral palsy. So I was very glad to get that photo. Join a genealogical or historical Facebook group. Again, Serendipity. I belong to several, and one of which is called The Living History of Illinois and Chicago. I still live in Illinois. I've grown up here and lived my entire life in the Chicago area. And this is a Facebook page that is vetted because it is part of the 6th grade curriculum history curriculum in the state of Illinois. And one day they posted this photograph album of the making of the Edens Highway. And that was the first super highway, as we used to call them, interstate today in the Chicago area. And you can see the building dates, 1950 to 1956. Well, my father was on one of those crews that built that highway. So I took a chance, went through it page by page, and on page 37, I found this photo, leaped right out at me because the man in the middle is my father at his job. And here's what it says there. And then this is the particular things. I found this in October of 2022. I know it's not only a good picture of my dad, but it's my dad at work. And how many of us find photos of our fathers or mothers or grandparents actually on the work job, doing that job? And here's one where my dad is actually doing it. Rule 7 is do try every database and resource. Don't skip any of them, even if you're pretty sure you look at and go, no way, they couldn't have been there at that time, or they didn't live in that part of whatever. If there's any chance, be sure you look at it. So, whoops, that went too fast. Again, there is a Facebook group that Family Search sponsors, divided into large geographic areas. So I'm in the Midwest, and so there is one for the Midwest. And I put a query up on it. This isn't a database per se, but it is a resource online. And I put in a query about Mary Elizabeth Brady, Henry's wife, because we were never able to prove her actual death date. There was a lot of information in the family stories, but we could never find a proof of it. So I'd outlined what I'd already looked at, so the other members of this community would not waste time repeating something I had done. And then 75 minutes later, 1 hour and 15 minutes later, I received this reply, her obit from the Iron County Register of February 10th, 1898. It's one paragraph, but that one paragraph then led me to 65 other references of the Brady family in Iron County, including a more complete obituary of Mary Elizabeth, her date of birth, where she was born, when they were married, and so forth. This was because I took a chance and put a query up on one of the family search communities that are on Facebook. And I cannot overemphasize how important this could be. Rule 8, don't rely on any index. All indexes are only as good as the people that read the handwriting and interpret and then hope to tell you what it says. Plus, no index gives you every bit of information that's on the original document. So don't rely on the index. Always look at the original record. So here is the index for the 1940 census for my father in Chicago. And there's some information on there. It tells me how old he is and that his birthplace is Illinois and so on. Doesn't give me an exact street address, but it does give me an enumeration district and so on. If I stopped at this page, I would only have the very bones. He's William Brady, born around 1902 because he's 38 years old. In 1935, he also lived in Chicago. He's head of household. He is married. And then there's the reference to the page number. But if I look at the actual document, I now have his rent per month, $35 a month. Here's the actual street and street number where he lives. We have how many years of school. So he's only done 8 years of school, while Margaret, his wife, has completed 2 years of high school. I also find out over here that he works as a stationary engineer for a retail department store. None of that is in the index. So if I didn't come to the actual record, I wouldn't get these little bits of additional information, including his schooling. which might come in handy at some point, especially this. He's a stationary engineer. In Chicago of 1940, there's many retail department stores, but the two biggest are Sears and Montgomery Ward, and Sears was very close to where he lived here. So that's probably where he worked. It's a supposition, but a good one. All right, rule number 9, do keep a list of name variations. Now, what I use is regular newspaper, notebook paper, 3-ring binders punched, and a 3-ring binder. And I keep it alphabetical by the names, and I have a section for surnames and a section for the given name as I normally would see it. And so I'm going to show you 2 examples. Well, here's McDonough. And as I've done my research, all of these are variants that I found in church records, on birth and death certificates, and so on. And as I find a new one, I just add it to the list. Now, this will help me with later searches, because if I can't find it spelled the way I expect it to be found, here's a lot of other ideas. Only one starts with the letter M. You notice we've got some variant on double letters and so on. You can start using wildcards where you see the consonants to help you find it, but this way you have some alternatives in your search when you can't find what you're expecting. Another name, which I usually try not to research, is Elizabeth. And all of these are variants of the name Elizabeth that I have found in the records for the same woman. Some of these may be nicknames in the sense that we would think of a nickname, but all of these can be used for the name Elizabeth, and I have found records where they are. It isn't all the same woman represented here, but just to give you an idea, I'm looking for an Elizabeth and suddenly I'm finding a Bella, or I'm looking for an Elizabeth and I find a Lisa. And sometimes you would think Lisa's a standalone name, and in this case, it actually was an Elizabeth. So I keep a page like this in these notebooks. And when I'm doing searches and I'm not getting anywhere with what I think it should be spelled like, then I will go to my notebook and start working down the variants. Rule 10, don't dismiss, it doesn't fit. Now, this may have been one of my biggest errors in my research history. I had found, I was looking for Henry Brady, born about 1846 in Wisconsin, and his parents were born in Ireland. Now, all of this is from the 1900 and later census. I tried to find him as a young child in Wisconsin, born 1846, which would give me a 3 or 4-year-old in 1850, a 13 or 14-year-old in 1860. He is in Chicago by 1870, so I know where he is as an adult, but I'm trying to find him as a child with his parents and potential other siblings. Looking for a Henry Brady, born circa 1846 in the state of Wisconsin, and whose parents were born in Ireland, I come up with one family, and this is the family. Michael and Ann Brady, their son Michael, their daughter Catherine in 1850. In 1860, Michael and Ann have another daughter, Mary, then Michael, Katie or Catherine, and then we have Angeline and Frederick. Now, my mother, she remembered an Angeline or Lena on the Brady side, and she also remembered Uncle Fred on the Brady side. So those last 2 names seem to match the family I'm looking for, but there's no Henry. The 3 or 13-year-old is a Michael. So do you dismiss it? You should not. What you do is you put it aside as a potential match where maybe they are using another given name for my Henry, and he is Henry M, and could it be Henry Michael? So then I put it aside, let it percolate somewhere in my files, keep working, and then I come to the 1900 census, and I'm looking for Henry, born in Wisconsin around 1846, parents born in Ireland. and literally the only Henry Brady in the entire United States, born in 1846 in Wisconsin with parents in Ireland, is this Henry Brady and a wife named Lavinia and 3 children. Now, my Henry is married to a Mary Elizabeth, and at this point, I did not know she was deceased before 1900, and none of these are children that I know in the family. So this does not, and he's also living in Oklahoma. So this does not appear to be my Henry. I didn't feel that there was enough strength in what little was on here to match to what I knew. So I put this aside. I didn't dismiss it. I put it aside and let it percolate back there in the file cabinet. And then one day, through Joan Waller, she tells me, I remember my mother telling me about visiting her grandfather's ranch in Oklahoma. Her mother's grandfather is Henry, and lo and behold, this is the correct Henry Brady with his second wife and 3 stepchildren, even though that's not indicated. So you do have to look at things, and if there's any possibility that it could be the right person, don't dismiss it. Just take it, put it in a file somewhere as probables or possibles, or however you want to name that file, and then keep coming back to it periodically. Does something now make sense that didn't make sense the first time you found it? You also see over here that it indicates they've been married 10 years, and Henry's first wife died only 4 years previously. So there's something over here that doesn't match. That this is from her, actually from Lavinia. She was married 3 times and had 10 children, and only 4 survived. So this is about Lavinia and not about Henry and Lavinia. You also have to make sure you know what these columns are telling you. All right, here's another one from that same side of the family. And Henry and Mary Elizabeth had a daughter, Mary Lulu, who was born in January 1877 in Chicago. And in the 1880 census, she is listed as Lulu, age 4, 1 year off. And daughter, she's born in Illinois, father's born in Wisconsin, mother's born in New York. The New York was off, but that's what it said in 1880. Then I tried to find her in 1900. And I could not find her with her parents or any of her siblings, but I did find a Lulu born in January 1877, who was born in Illinois, father born in Wisconsin, mother born in Ireland, and living in that same county where her mother passed away. This could be my Mary Lulu. So if she is, how is she a niece to John Lashley? And you would have to follow up on that. And I'm not sure she is. I still cannot prove a relationship. I think she was just a boarder and they called her a niece, sort of by really roundabout intermarriage, maybe. 1910, I find a Lulu M, who's now age 29. She's a nurse, but that Illinois, Wisconsin, Ireland sticks together, and she's living in Eugene, Oregon. Then I find her in 1920, another Lulu M, age 34, still a nurse, but still with Illinois, Wisconsin, Ireland, and now she's in Koblenz, Germany. And then in 1930, I find a Mary L, who's age 43, but still with Illinois, Wisconsin, Ireland, and she's living in Port Townsend, Washington. So you take a look at this and you go, well, some of it is the same and some of it isn't, but that Illinois, Wisconsin, Ireland as a combination is rather unusual. So that gives some weight that this is the same Lulu, and it is worth then researching this Lulu to see if in fact she is Mary Lulu Brady, which in fact she is. The Koblenz, Germany is because she was a nurse in the Army Hospital in Koblenz in 1920. She actually worked for the Public Health Service. So now rule 11, do creative searches. So we have that unique Illinois, Wisconsin, Ireland. So it is possible today, especially now that we have online indexes for our censuses in the United States, it is possible to do searches without using names at all. So I'm trying to find Henry and Mary Elizabeth's daughters. I've lost Mary Lulu, you just saw, and I did have a good chance of finding her. But then the other daughters, did they get married? Did they not get married? If they got married, did they stay in Illinois, and so on? But I had a 10-year period of birth for all of the sisters, all fit in that 10-year period, 1870 to 1880. They were all born in Illinois, and then their father was Wisconsin and their mother was Ireland. Using this census parameters, and this is for 1920, but you can use it for almost all of the US censuses from 1900 on. Then in my results, I found one person that had the same given name as one of the girls in the family, Laura K. Wilson, Laura Catherine, as far as the family knows. And she's supposed to be a Boyd. Well, here I have a Laura K. Wilson, married to a Fred Wilson. Her age is about right, and so forth. Is this her? From the census index, you cannot tell, but it is a link, and it is a hint to follow up on. And yes, in fact, this is Laura K. Brady Boyd, whose second husband is Fred Wilson, and there she is in 1920. I would never have been able to find her otherwise. Rule 12, don't limit yourself to they always lived here. Now, my dad said his entire family had always lived in the Chicago area. They never had lived anywhere else, and he was quite adamant about that, as only Irishmen can be. But now when I take a look at the known family at this point, Henry, his grandfather, lived in Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, Missouri, and Oklahoma. His uncle Hugh, or Frederick, in that 1860 census, lived in Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Washington. His uncle Fred, his dad's brother, lived in Illinois, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. His aunt Angeline, or Angelina, lived in Illinois and Indiana. Mary Lulu, Illinois, Missouri, Oregon, Germany, Washington, and California. But my dad insisted they always lived in Chicago. It is a clue. It is nothing to be taken as rock hard evidence. Just take it as a clue, and just because something doesn't fit that, don't dismiss it. Follow up. Rule 13 is check everything, including the collateral lines. So if we go back to this is Andrew's first child's baptism in December 6, 1868 in Holy Family Catholic Church in Chicago. And this is their first son, George Andrew, son of Andrew John and Ellen. And this is the only record I have found with a mention of Andrew's middle name. It is what, if there is no other reason to follow up on collateral lines, this is it. It may be the only place you're going to find a reference to that middle name, where before you only had an initial. Always Andrew J, but in this one baptismal entry, it is Andrew John. And then also you can see there are two sponsors listed. They could be relatives. They could be collateral. They're always worth at least some research to try to determine at least are they related. Rule 14, always analyze, analyze, analyze. So one of the things I like to do with any of mine that I have witnesses for marriages and baptisms is to make a timeline of all of those witnesses and baptisms. So this is the Brady McDonough family, beginning in August 1843 with Andrew's baptism in Chicago, and then following each additional baptism and marriage all the way up to just about World War I. I made a complete list of everybody. And then once I had the list, I went back through and I identified by color those that I knew were related on the McDonough side and those that had the same surname but not relationship unknown. So Michael Jones falls into that. Everyone else is a known McDonough. Then I also identify everyone. This is a little bit later now, but you can see where there's the Joneses in one color. Here's my green McDonoughs. Eventually I got to the Bradys, they're in a color, but everybody that I didn't know how they related, I put and left them in dark black, but then I underlined them. And every underline meant that is a person to research, to do some research on, to determine if there is a relationship to the family. And when you do that, you find out, excuse me, that Joanna Copps is Joanna Jones. She should really be a purple because she is a sister to Richard and Michael. But I had to research that to find that out. I had to look for a marriage. This Harv Nelson could be related to one of the first husbands of one of the sisters in the late part of the 1890s. I haven't been able to definitely prove that, but it is an avenue of exploration. So to repeat, I would list everybody, then color code by known family groups, and then identify who's left with an underline. Excuse me. And those underlines then are people I need to follow up on research. That's part of how you analyze. Take a look at all of your censuses. Take a look at what the column is telling you. And does that give you any hints of places to go look and things you need to look up and records that might be in existence? When you're analyzing, you're taking a look at a primary or secondary document, and you are trying to look at every single bit of information on it and what is that telling you for future research or a hint of some place to go. Rule 15, in these days, do submit a DNA test. You can pick any one of the 4 major ones and do a DNA test. Pardon that, we're at the center and someone needs to get in. So I did that, and this is Ancestry. And we have here a Margaret Ann Jones, and this is a predicted relationship of 4th cousin.
Okay.
So the 4th cousin is on this line by DNA. When I looked at another one, it's also a Jones, this time as a 3rd cousin, but this is also by DNA match. So it would show that I have strong DNA connections to Joneses. And if you would go back to that list of sponsors, there's a lot of Joneses in that list as well. So it would indicate to me that one of my family names is going to be Jones in Chicago. And while I may want to say no, I'm not going to attempt that last name, it's worth following up on. So rule 16, keep your complete source information. I was very bad at this when I first began. And so I have newspaper clippings from all over, and I have little notes from various places, and I have no idea where I found the information. And now I would like to go back and find it again, and I can't. So try to get in this habit, no matter what you go, I don't know where this came from. Well, no, you won't. Put down your sources very carefully. So this is a death notice from the Chicago Tribune. I have the day, the date, the page, the column, and the website I found it on, and the date I found it on. This is the way you would normally source a newspaper article or obituary. And this is my Mary Ann Osborne, who her second husband was a Donovan or any variant thereon. So be very careful that you are taking down every piece of information so that when you want to find that information again, you can do it. And if somebody else is looking at it, they'll have some proof of where you found it. Rule 17 in the last one is repeat, repeat, repeat. By that I mean, you've looked at an index or a database 10 years ago, and you think, well, I'm never need to go back and look at it again. No, you need to look at it again and again and again, because first of all, more information gets added to that database, but also they sometimes will go back and revise them and make them more informational. So a few years back, the Cook County, Illinois Death Index at FamilySearch.org was redone to include the names of the parents. Before that, it was just the name of the deceased, the date of death, and so on. But they redid it to add the parents. So working on that Jones line, and for my grandmother's death certificate, knowing her parents are Richard Jones and Margaret Anglum, I did a search for Richard Jones, and then I used some asterisks to represent one or more letters. Not sure how this end of the last name would be written in a given document. And is she Margaret? Is she Margaret? Is she Margaret? This covers all, or Margie even. This covers all of those. So I did a search again. And this time, yes, I found my grandmother, Ellen McDonough, who died in 1912. But I found two other hits. A Jenny Barnes, who was also died in 1912, but she's born in New York. And Maurice Jones, died in 1919, actually said he's born in Rome, New York. But with this set of parents, Richard Jones and Margaret with some sort of spelling at the end. And here's two references to the state of New York. I had no clue until I looked at this that the family had ever spent time in New York. And having this information, I went to the 1855 state census of Rome, Oneida County, New York, because that was the one, it was a state census, but it listed everyone in the family. And here's Ellen, and here's Jane or Joan or Jean or any variant of that. And here's Maurice. And the last three are born in Oneida County, and everyone else is born in Ireland. Not only does this prove that those three are probably all brothers and sisters, it also gives me a pretty good idea of when they came from Ireland to the United States, because Michael is age 6 and Mary is age 6. One born in Ireland, one born in New York. Taking that information, I went to the city directories then. I had some additional names. And in 1866, 1870, directories for Chicago, there was a Michael Jones who lived at 103 West 12th Street. And there was also a Richard Jones, roughly in that same time frame, who lived at 103 West 12th Street. Well, Richard is both a father and a son, and then Michael is a son. So this also then links that Jones family together. It's not proven, but it's a very strong hint. And then Richard, in 1869, moves to 136 DeKoven Street. And Maurice then is living there in 1875 at the same address, 136 DeKoven Street. Those of us who may know Chicago history, in October of 1871, there was the Great Chicago Fire, which started in the barn behind this house at 137 DeKoven Street. And looking at the census and other records, I have proven that Richard M. family at 136 were living across the street from the start of the Chicago fire from the O'Leary house. And the fire went north and their side of the street was not damaged. The peculiar thing to me is there is no family story that has passed this on. I discovered it by accident, if you will, by good, solid research, analyzing, reanalyzing, going back and looking at my records, what other record might give me some more information. Only by doing that very in-depth process did I come up with Richard living at 136 the night of the Chicago fire across the street at 137. And now the story is part of the family lore. It must have been at one point, but has been lost in time, and I've been able to recreate it. So in summary, This is my pedigree chart now for my dad down here at number 1. We only had this column when I started 41 years ago, and now we have filled out to this column, and this is the end of the line right now because it's all Irish, or it's a common name wherever they're coming from, Mary Ann out of Oswego County, New York. I have no idea what Needham this might be, other than, of course, her father is a Needham, but that's why this one is totally blank. Then, going at my descendants lists, which was all essentially one short page, these are the Brady descendants from Michael Brady in that 1850 census with his wife Anne, and it goes on much longer than that. This is just the beginning of it. And then if I look at Mary Ann, the Andrew McDonough's wife, this is the beginning of her descendants list. I picked her because she had 2 husbands, and those would all be half cousins. And so you can do it. It will take time, but use my list of rules to give you some ideas and some thoughts about what you can do when you're stuck. And thank you so much for listening, and we'll go back and see whether there's any questions now.
There's not any questions yet, but if anyone has a question, feel free to type it in the chat. I guess not. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you will join us for our next webinar on May 14th with Catherine Grant. She will be giving a presentation entitled Demystifying AI in Family History. A recording of this webinar will be made available by next week. You can view that on our YouTube channel or our website. If you have any comments or questions, you can always email us at fh_webinars@byu.edu or follow Facebook and Twitter. Thank you and have a wonderful week.